His music died with his wife, but an unexpected new companion brought him back. The salt-laced wind whipped off the Atlantic, carrying the scent of brine and the cries of gulls. It rattled the weathered shingles of Arthur Miller's small cottage, perched on a bluff overlooking the rugged Maine coastline. The house, once filled with laughter and the vibrant strains of a violin, now stood silent, a solitary sentinel against the vast, gray expanse of the ocean. Arthur, 78 years old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and sorrow, sat on his porch, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. His hands, once nimble and strong enough to coax magic from the strings of his beloved violin, were now gnarled and stiff, resting idly in his lap. He stared out at the sea, his eyes, the pale blue of a winter sky, unfocused and distant. It had been 5 years since Sarah, his wife of 52 years, had passed away. 5 years since the music had died within him. Sarah, a gifted pianist, had been his everything, his partner, his muse, his best friend. Their lives had been intertwined with music, a shared passion that had filled their home with joy and harmony. They had performed together in grand concert halls and intimate gatherings, their music weaving a tapestry of love and shared experience. But a sudden, aggressive illness had stolen Sarah away, leaving Arthur adrift in a sea of silence. The violin, a magnificent instrument crafted in Italy centuries ago, lay dormant in its velvet-lined case in the corner of the living room. It had been Arthur's constant companion since his youth, a gift from his grandfather, a renowned violinist himself. He had played it with a passion that had captivated audiences, his music expressing the depths of his soul. But now, it remained untouched, a silent testament to his grief. Arthur's days followed a predictable, monotonous rhythm. He woke before dawn, the silence of the house pressing down on him. He made a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, eating it without tasting, his mind lost in memories. He would tend to his small garden, the physical labor a distraction from the ache in his heart. He might walk into the nearby town, a quaint fishing village with a handful of shops and a friendly, if somewhat reserved, population. He would nod greetings to the locals, exchange a few polite words, but he kept himself apart, a solitary figure in a community that had once embraced him and Sarah with open arms. The townsfolk remembered Arthur and Sarah's music. They remembered the concerts they had given in the town square, the melodies that had filled the air with joy and celebration. They understood his grief, respected his silence, but they also missed the music, the life it had brought to their small town. He used to be such a vibrant man. Martha, the owner of the local bakery, would say to her customers, shaking her head sadly, "The music just flowed out of him. Now he's like a ghost, a shadow of his former self." Arthur knew what they said. He felt their pity, but he couldn't bring himself to break free from the chains of his sorrow. The thought of playing the violin again, of making music without Sarah, was unbearable. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of their shared world. Evenings were the hardest. The setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, used to be a time of shared joy, a time for music and laughter. Now it only served to deepen his loneliness. He would sit on the porch, watching the light fade, the darkness mirroring the emptiness in his heart. One evening, as he sat lost in thought, a movement caught his eye. A flash of orange fur darted across the edge of his property, disappearing into the overgrown bushes that bordered his yard. It was a cat, a scruffy ginger stray, its fur matted and its tail ragged. Arthur watched it for a moment, a flicker of curiosity stirring within him. He hadn't seen a cat around his property in years. The cat reappeared the next day, and the day after that. It would sit at the edge of the yard, watching him with wary green eyes. It was clearly hungry, its ribs showing through its thin fur. Arthur, despite his initial indifference, found himself feeling a pang of sympathy for the creature. He left a small bowl of milk on the porch, a hesitant offering. The cat approached cautiously, sniffing the air, its eyes fixed on Arthur. It lapped up the milk quickly, then retreated back into the bushes. This became a routine. Arthur would leave food and water for the cat, and the cat would cautiously accept it, always maintaining a safe distance. He didn't try to approach it, didn't try to touch it. He simply provided for it, a small act of kindness in a world that had become devoid of joy. He noticed it wasn't just the cat. By a remarkable coincidence, there was also an old, injured horse nearby. It was in a neighboring, abandoned field. An old palomino, its coat dull and its ribs showing. It limped badly, favoring its right front leg. Arthur had seen it from his porch, grazing listlessly in the overgrown pasture. The sight of the horse, so clearly neglected and in pain, stirred something within him, a flicker of compassion that had long been dormant. He knew he couldn't ignore it. He walked over to the field, the cat following him a short distance behind, and examined the horse. Its eyes were dull, its breathing labored. It flinched when Arthur reached out to touch it, but it didn't run. "Easy there, old fellow," Arthur murmured, his voice rough with disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." He spent the next few days tending to the horse, bringing it water and hay, cleaning its injured leg, and applying a soothing ointment he found in his medicine cabinet, a leftover from Sarah's days of caring for their own horses, long ago. The cat would watch from a distance, its green eyes following his every move. A quiet companionship starts to build between the three. The silence of the strings remained, but in the quiet acts of caring for the stray cat and the abandoned horse, a faint glimmer of something else began to emerge in Arthur's life. A spark of connection, a whisper of hope in the vast emptiness of his grief. He hasn't noticed it yet, but in the eyes of his two new friends, there was a kind of acceptance, the start of a comfort that he would come to lean on. The routine continued, a fragile dance of trust slowly building between Arthur, the cat, and the neglected horse. He named the cat Rusty, for the color of his fur, a simple, practical name that suited the creature's wary nature. The horse, he decided to call him Soul, after remembering a gentle, old horse he and Sarah used to own. Soul was the Spanish word for sun, and though this horse was far from radiant now, Arthur hoped he could bring a little light back into the animal's life. Each morning, Arthur would make his rounds. First, to Soul's field, carrying a bucket of fresh water and an armful of hay. The horse would greet him with a soft whinny, a sound that tugged at Arthur's heart. He would carefully clean Soul's leg, noticing a slight improvement, a lessening of the swelling. The touch of the horse's warm coat, the gentle nuzzle against his hand, were small comforts, fleeting moments of connection that eased the ever-present ache of loneliness. Then, he would return to his cottage, where Rusty would be waiting, usually perched on the porch railing, a ginger sentinel. He'd fill a bowl with food and another with water, placing them at a respectful distance. Rusty would watch him with those intense green eyes, still cautious, but no longer running away. Sometimes the cat would even allow Arthur to sit on the porch steps, a few feet away, while he ate. These small interactions, these acts of caring, were slowly chipping away at the wall Arthur had built around his heart. He hadn't realized it, but the need to care for these two creatures was forcing him to engage with the world again, to step outside the confines of his grief. One afternoon, while grooming Soul, Arthur found himself humming. It was a simple melody, a fragment of a folk song he and Sarah used to play. He stopped abruptly, startled by the sound of his own voice. It had been so long since he had made any music, even unconsciously. He looked at Soul, who seemed to be listening intently, his ears twitching. A wave of sadness washed over Arthur, but it was different this time, tinged with a hint of something else, a faint echo of the joy he had once found in music. The flashbacks started to become more frequent, triggered by the smallest things. The way Rusty curled up on the windowsill, bathed in the afternoon sun, reminded him of a cat Sarah had rescued years ago, a calico named Patches. Patches had loved to sit on Sarah's piano while she played, purring contentedly. The memory brought a sharp pang of grief, but also a smile. Another day, while mending a section of the fence around Soul's field, Arthur remembered the time he and Sarah had built a stable together, their hands working in unison, their laughter echoing through the air. They had been young then, full of dreams and plans, their lives stretching out before them like an endless melody. He paused, leaning against the fence post, the weight of the years pressing down on him. He looked out at Sol, grazing peacefully in the field, and at Rusty, who had followed him and was now rubbing against his legs, purring loudly. A thought flickered in his mind, a dangerous, almost impossible thought. Could he ever play music again? Not for an audience, not for fame or recognition, but for himself, for Sarah, for the two creatures who had somehow found their way into his broken life. The idea was both terrifying and alluring. He pushed it away, dismissing it as a foolish fantasy. He was too old, too broken, too far gone. The music had died with Sarah, he told himself. It was gone forever. But the cat and the horse seemed to have other ideas. Rusty, in particular, developed a habit of sitting by the window that looked into the living room, where the violin case lay. He would sit there for hours, gazing at the case with an almost knowing expression, as if he understood the significance of the silent instrument within. Sol also did something similar. Every time Arthur visited, no matter how bad the horse felt, he made a special sound. It was not a whinny, and it was more than a grunt. One rainy afternoon, Arthur found himself drawn to the living room. He stood in front of the violin case, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't touched it in 5 years. He reached out, his hand trembling, and slowly unlatched the clasps. He lifted the lid, the scent of aged wood and rosin filling his nostrils. The violin lay nestled in its velvet lining, gleaming softly in the dim light. It looked exactly as he remembered it. A beautiful, timeless instrument that had been his faithful companion for so many years. He picked it up, the feel of the smooth wood against his fingers sending a shiver down his spine. He sat down in his armchair, the violin resting in his lap. He closed his eyes, picturing Sarah sitting at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, her face radiant with joy. He could almost hear the music, the melodies they had created together, the harmonies that had filled their lives. A tear rolled down his cheek, followed by another and another. He wept silently, the violin clutched tightly in his arms, the grief pouring out of him like a torrent. Rusty, who had been watching from the windowsill, jumped down and rubbed against his legs, purring softly. Sol also made that sound from his field, the sound echoing through the air. Arthur didn't play that day. He simply sat there, holding the violin, letting the memories wash over him. But something had shifted. The seal had been broken. The silence had been pierced, if only by the sound of his own tears. The journey back to music would be long and arduous, but a tiny seed of hope had been planted, nurtured by the quiet companionship of a stray cat and an abandoned horse. And unbeknownst to him, that seed was about to sprout. The following weeks saw a subtle but significant change in Arthur's demeanor. The rigid lines of grief that had etched his face seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of something akin to anticipation. He still carried the weight of his loss. The silence of the house still echoed with Sarah's absence, but the presence of Rusty and Sol had created a small, warm space within that emptiness. He found himself paying more attention to the sounds around him, the chirping of birds in the morning, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. These sounds, once a backdrop to his sorrow, now began to register as a kind of natural music, a symphony of life that had continued even in his silence. He started humming again, small fragments of melodies, often without realizing it. He'd be grooming Sol, his hands moving in a rhythmic motion, and a tune would emerge from his lips, a half-forgotten folk song or a snippet of a classical piece he and Sarah had loved. He'd catch himself, startled, but the feeling wasn't the sharp pain of the past. It was more like a gentle ache, a bittersweet reminder of the joy music had once brought him. Rusty, ever observant, seemed to encourage these moments. He'd sit by Arthur's feet while he worked in the garden, purring loudly whenever Arthur hummed, as if applauding his efforts. Sol, too, seemed to respond to the sounds, his ears pricking up, his soft whinnies taking on a different tone. One Saturday morning, Arthur decided to attend the town's annual summer fair. He hadn't gone in years, the lively atmosphere and the music feeling too painful, too much of a reminder of what he had lost. But this year, something compelled him to go. Perhaps it was Rusty's persistent gaze at the violin case, or Soul's gentle nudges, or perhaps it was simply a growing need to reconnect with the world, to step outside the confines of his solitude. The fair was a riot of color and sound. Children shrieked with laughter on the rides, vendors hawked their wares, and a local band played lively bluegrass music on a makeshift stage. Arthur felt a pang of unease as he walked through the crowd, the noise and activity overwhelming after years of quiet isolation. He found himself drawn to the music, though. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the band, a fiddler, a banjo player, a guitarist, and a bassist, their instruments weaving a tapestry of lively sound. The music was infectious, and he saw people tapping their feet, clapping their hands, their faces lit up with joy. Arthur closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. It was different from the classical music he and Sarah had played, but it had a similar power, a similar ability to evoke emotion, to tell a story. He felt a familiar stirring in his chest, a longing for the days when he, too, could create such magic with his instrument. "Arthur? Arthur Miller? Is that you?" A voice broke through his reverie. He opened his eyes and saw a woman standing in front of him, her face wrinkled and kind, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and warmth. It was Martha, the owner of the local bakery, the woman who had often lamented his withdrawal from the world. "Martha," he said, his voice a little rusty from disuse. "It's good to see you." "It's good to see you too, Arthur," she said, smiling. "I haven't seen you at the fair in years. Are you enjoying the music?" "It's lively," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "They're good, aren't they?" Martha said. "They remind me of you and Sarah. Remember those concerts you used to give in the town square? Everyone loved them. We all miss your music, Arthur." Her words, spoken with genuine warmth and affection, struck a chord within him. He looked at the band again, at the joy on their faces and the faces of the audience. He thought of Sarah, of the music they had shared, of the happiness it had brought them and others. I haven't played in a long time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Martha said softly, "but maybe it's time you did. Not for us, Arthur, but for yourself. For Sarah." Her words hung in the air, a gentle suggestion, a seed of an idea that had already begun to take root in his mind. He didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss the idea either. He stayed at the fair for a while longer, listening to the music, observing the people, feeling the energy of the community around him. He even bought a slice of Martha's apple pie, a small indulgence that he hadn't allowed himself in years. As he walked back to his cottage, the setting sun painting the sky in vibrant hues, he felt a shift within him. The music, the conversation with Martha, the simple act of being among people again, had awakened something that had been dormant for too long. He realized the sound soul always makes has a tune. When he reached home, Rusty was waiting for him on the porch, his green eyes gleaming in the twilight. Arthur sat down beside him, stroking the cat's soft fur. He looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, the sound a constant, rhythmic pulse. He thought of Sarah, of her smile, her laughter, her love of music. He thought of the violin, lying silent in its case, waiting to be played. He thought of Rusty and Soul, the two creatures who had brought a measure of companionship and comfort into his lonely life. And for the first time in 5 years, Arthur Miller felt a flicker of hope, a faint whisper of a melody stirring within his soul. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he couldn't remain silent forever. The music, like a river, needed to flow again. It was time to open the case. The decision wasn't a sudden, dramatic one. It was more like a slow, gradual thawing, a melting of the ice that had encased Arthur's heart for so long. The days following the town fair were filled with a quiet anticipation, a sense of purpose that had been absent from his life since Sarah's passing. He started spending more time in the living room, near the violin case. He wouldn't open it, not yet, but he would sit in his armchair, looking at it, his fingers tracing the outline of the case on his lap. He'd listened to the sounds of the house, the creaks and groans of the old structure, the gentle purring of Rusty, who often sat beside him, his green eyes fixed on the case. One morning, after his usual routine of caring for Soul and Rusty, Arthur found himself standing in front of the case, his hand hovering over the clasps. He took a deep breath, the scent of the sea air filling his lungs, and slowly opened it. The violin gleamed in the morning light, its wood a rich, warm brown. It looked untouched, pristine, as if frozen in time. Arthur reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently lifted the instrument from its velvet bed. The feel of the wood against his skin was familiar, comforting, yet also strangely foreign. It had been so long. He held the violin close, inhaling the scent of rosin and aged wood, a wave of memories flooding over him. He could almost feel Sarah beside him, her presence a tangible force in the silent room. He sat down in his armchair, the violin resting in his lap. He didn't try to play, not yet. He simply held it, letting his fingers explore the curves and contours of the instrument, reacquainting himself with its weight and balance. He spent the rest of the morning cleaning the violin, using the special cloths and polishes he had kept meticulously stored away. He cleaned the strings, tightened the bow, his movements slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic. It was a labor of love, a way of honoring the instrument and the music it had once produced. Rusty watched him from the windowsill, his purr a constant, soothing presence. Soul, from his field, seemed to sense the shift in Arthur's energy, his whinnies sounding more frequent and urgent. It was late afternoon when Arthur finally placed the violin under his chin. He adjusted the shoulder rest, the familiar feel sending a shiver of anticipation through him. He picked up the bow, his hand shaking slightly, and drew it across the strings. The sound that emerged was hesitant, scratchy, a far cry from the rich, vibrant tones he had once produced. He winced, his fingers stiff and clumsy, his muscles unaccustomed to the precise movements required. He tried again, focusing on the basics, on the simple act of drawing the bow smoothly across the strings. The sound was still uneven, but it was better, a little clearer, a little more resonant. He continued to play, practicing simple scales and arpeggios, the exercises he had learned as a child, the foundations of his musical technique. His fingers slowly regained their dexterity, his muscles their memory. The sounds became smoother, more consistent, the music beginning to flow, haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence. Rusty, who had been watching intently, jumped down from the windowsill and curled up at Arthur's feet, purring contentedly. It was as if the cat understood the significance of the moment, the return of the music that had been silenced for so long. Arthur didn't try to play any specific piece. He simply let his fingers move, letting the music guide him, letting his emotions flow through the instrument. He played for hours, until the light faded and the room was filled with shadows. He was exhausted, his fingers aching, his shoulders sore, but he also felt a sense of exhilaration, a feeling of release that he hadn't experienced in years. The music had been locked inside him, a prisoner of his grief, and now it was finally free. Over the next few weeks, Arthur devoted himself to the composition of his last song. It wasn't a conscious decision, a grand plan, but rather a gradual unfolding, a natural expression of his emotions, his memories, his love for Sarah, and the solace he had found in the companionship of Rusty and Soul. He didn't write down the music, not at first. He simply played, letting the melody evolve organically, letting his heart guide his fingers. He would sit in his armchair, the violin under his chin, Rusty at his feet, and play for hours, experimenting with different phrases, different rhythms, different harmonies. The music that emerged was unlike anything he had played before. It wasn't a showy concerto or a lively folk tune. It was a simple, heartfelt melody, a lament, a love song, a tribute. It was filled with sadness, yes, but also with a quiet beauty, a sense of peace, a hint of hope. He found inspiration in the sounds around him, the mournful cry of the gulls, the rhythmic crashing of the waves, the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees. He incorporated these sounds into his music, weaving them into the fabric of his composition. He used soul sound a lot. He struggled, of course. There were days when the music wouldn't come, when his fingers felt clumsy and his heart heavy. There were moments of doubt, moments of despair, when he felt like giving up, when he believed he was too old, too broken, to create anything of beauty. But he persevered. He would look at Rusty, sitting patiently by his side, his green eyes filled with an unwavering trust. He would think of Soul, grazing peacefully in the field, his gentle presence a constant reminder of the resilience of life. And he would pick up the violin again and he would play. Slowly, gradually, the last song began to take shape. It was a piece of music that spoke of loss and love, of grief and hope, of the enduring power of the human spirit. It was a song for Sarah, a song for Rusty, a song for Soul, and a song for himself. It was the final chapter in a life filled with music, a testament to the enduring power of art to heal and to transcend even the deepest sorrow. The melody was complete. It flowed from Arthur's violin like a stream, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, always carrying the weight of his emotions. He had finally, painstakingly written it down, the notes on the aged manuscript paper mirroring the lines on his own face, a record of time, of loss, of love, and ultimately of resilience. He played it for Rusty and Soul first. He sat on his porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and pine. Rusty sat at his feet, his usual watchful gaze even more intense than usual. Soul stood at the edge of his field, his head held high, his ears pricked forward. As Arthur drew the bow across the strings, the music filled the air. It was a simple melody, yet profound in its simplicity. It began with a slow, mournful passage, reflecting the years of silence and grief. Then, it gradually shifted, incorporating a lighter, more hopeful theme, a reflection of the companionship he had found in the two animals. There were echoes of Sarah in the music, fragments of melodies they had played together, woven into the fabric of the new composition. Soul's sound was reflected in the piece. Rusty purred throughout the performance, his body vibrating against Arthur's leg. Soul, after a moment of stillness, let out a soft whinny, a sound of recognition, perhaps, or of understanding. Arthur finished playing, his eyes filled with tears. He hadn't felt this connected to his emotions, to his music, to life itself in years. He knew he couldn't keep the song to himself. Martha's words, spoken at the town fair, echoed in his mind. Maybe it's time you did. Not for us, Arthur, but for yourself. For Sarah. He decided to share the piece, but not in a grand, public performance. He wasn't seeking applause or recognition. He wanted to share it with those who had known Sarah, those who understood his loss, those who had been a part of his and Sarah's musical journey. He spoke to Reverend Johnson, the pastor of the small, white-steepled church in town. He and Sarah had often played at church services, their music a cherished part of the community's worship. Reverend Johnson readily agreed, offering the church as a venue for a small, informal gathering. Word spread through the town, quietly, respectfully. People remembered Arthur and Sarah's music. They remembered their kindness, their generosity, their contribution to the community. They were curious, sympathetic, and eager to hear Arthur play again. The day of the performance arrived, a crisp autumn afternoon. The church was filled, not to capacity, but with a good number of people, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, all those who had been touched by Arthur and Sarah's lives. The atmosphere was hushed, expectant, tinged with a sense of reverence. Arthur stood at the front of the church, his violin in hand. He looked older, frilier than many remembered, but there was a new strength in his eyes, a quiet determination. Rusty was not there, of course, but Arthur had brought Soul to the grassy area outside. He spoke briefly, his voice trembling slightly at first, then gaining strength. He spoke of Sarah, of their shared love of music, of his loss, and of the unexpected companionship he had found in a stray cat and an abandoned horse. He spoke of the last song, explaining that it was a tribute to Sarah, a way of saying goodbye and a way of finding peace. Then he began to play. The music filled the small church, weaving its way through the wooden pews, reaching every corner of the sanctuary. It was a deeply emotional performance. Arthur's heart poured out through the strings of his violin. The melody was simple, yet profound, carrying the weight of his grief, but also the lightness of his rediscovered hope. Tears flowed freely, both from Arthur and from the audience. It was a cathartic experience, a shared moment of mourning and remembrance, a celebration of a life well lived and a love that transcended death. It was a testament to the power of music to heal, to connect, to transcend the boundaries of language and loss. As the final notes faded away, a profound silence filled the church. Then, slowly, applause began. Not the thunderous applause of a concert hall, but a gentle, heartfelt expression of gratitude and understanding. Arthur lowered his violin, his body trembling with exhaustion and emotion. He looked out at the faces in the audience, seeing their tears, their smiles, their nods of appreciation. He felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace he hadn't thought possible. After the small concert, as the sun began to set, he walked slowly back to his cottage with Sol, stopping to embrace those who offered their condolences and thanks. He had done it. He had played his last song. The following days were peaceful. Arthur resumed his routine, caring for Rusty and Sol, tending to his garden, walking into town. But something had changed. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was filled, instead, with the echoes of the music, with the memories of Sarah, with the quiet companionship of his two animal friends. One morning Arthur found Sol laying down in his field, his breathing shallow, his eyes dull. He knew, with a sinking heart, that the horse's time was near. Sol was very old, and the injured leg had never fully recovered. He knelt beside the horse, stroking his mane, speaking to him softly. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." Sol looked at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He let out a soft sigh, and then, peacefully, he was gone. Arthur buried Sol in the field, under a sprawling oak tree, a place where the sun shone warmly and the wildflowers grew in abundance. He fashioned a simple wooden cross, marking the grave with the horse's name and the words, "A gentle soul." He grieved, of course. The loss of Sol was another blow, another reminder of the impermanence of life. But it was a different kind of grief, not the all-consuming despair he had felt after Sarah's death. He had learned, through his music, through his connection with Rusty and Sol, that even in the face of loss, there could be beauty, there could be peace, there could be hope. He continued to play his violin, not every day but often. He played for Rusty, who would sit patiently at his feet, purring contentedly. He played for himself, for the sheer joy of creating music, of expressing his emotions, of connecting with the world around him. He even started giving informal lessons to a young girl in town, a shy, quiet child who had shown an interest in the violin. He found a renewed purpose in sharing his knowledge, in passing on his love of music to a new generation. Life, he realized, was a tapestry woven with threads of joy and sorrow, of love and loss, of silence and music. The last song had not been an ending, but a new beginning, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to heal, to adapt, and to find beauty even in the face of adversity. And as he looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, the gulls crying overhead, he knew that the music would continue, in one form or another, as long as his heart still beat. The cat, his faithful companion, remained by his side, a silent promise of continued friendship, a warm presence in a world that had once seemed so cold and empty. The silence was gone, replaced by a melody of life, a song that would continue to resonate long after he was gone. She cherished her two ginger cats, but fate had a cruel twist in store. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace-curtained windows of Mrs. Eleanor Davison's modest home in Havenwood, Connecticut, painting warm stripes across the faded floral rug. Dust motes danced in the golden light, illuminated like tiny stars. On a plush, overstuffed armchair, bathed in that same sunlight, two ginger cats lay curled together, a tangle of orange fur and purring contentment. These were Marmalade and Rusty, brothers in all but blood, companions for 15 long, sun-drenched years. Marmalade, the slightly larger of the two, was a bold, adventurous spirit. His fur was a vibrant, fiery orange, and his eyes were a bright, inquisitive green. He was the explorer, the one who'd venture to the furthest corners of the garden, chase butterflies with reckless abandon, and occasionally bring Mrs. Davison a gift of a captured and thankfully usually unharmed field mouse. Rusty, on the other hand, was a creature of comfort. His fur was a softer, more muted shade of ginger, like faded apricot, and his eyes were a gentle amber hue. He preferred the warmth of a lap, the soft stroke of a hand, the quiet companionship of his brother and their beloved owner. He was the homebuddy, content to watch the world go by from the safety of the windowsill, his purr a constant, rumbling undercurrent to the quiet house. Mrs. Davison, a widow of many years, found immense solace in the company of her two feline companions. Her husband, George, had passed away a decade prior, and the cats had been a constant source of comfort and unwavering affection. They were her family, her furry anchors in a world that sometimes felt too quiet, too empty. "My sweet boys," she'd murmur, stroking their soft fur as they purred in unison. "What would I do without you?" The days in the Davison household unfolded with a gentle, predictable rhythm. Mornings began with the soft patter of paws on the hardwood floor as Marmalade and Rusty made their way to the kitchen, their tails held high, anticipating breakfast. Mrs. Davison, her silver hair neatly pinned in a bun, would oblige, filling their bowls with their favorite salmon-flavored kibble. After breakfast, Marmalade would usually embark on his daily garden patrol, a self-appointed guardian of the blooming rose bushes and the chirping bird feeders. Rusty, meanwhile, would find a sunny spot on the porch or in a window, content to observe the world from a safe distance. Afternoons were for napping, often curled together in a sunbeam or on Mrs. Davison's lap as she read her favorite novels or worked on her intricate needlepoint projects. Evenings were a time for quiet companionship, with the three of them sharing the living room, the gentle glow of the lamps casting long shadows on the walls. The television might be on, tuned to a classic movie or a nature documentary, but the real entertainment was the quiet murmur of Mrs. Davison's voice, the soft purring of the cats, and the occasional playful swat from Marmalade to Rusty, a gentle reminder of their enduring bond. The cats had their little routines, their unspoken agreements. Marmalade always got the first lick of the yogurt container after Mrs. Davison finished her breakfast. Rusty always claimed the prime spot on the armchair, the one closest to the fireplace in the winter. They'd groom each other meticulously, their rough tongues rasping against fur, a ritual of affection and care. They'd seen seasons change countless times, watched the leaves turn from vibrant green to fiery red and gold, then fall to the ground, leaving the branches bare against the winter sky. They'd felt the warmth of summer sun on their fur and the chill of winter snow on their paws. Through it all, their bond remained unbroken, a silent testament to the enduring power of companionship. One particular memory stood out in Mrs. Davison's mind. It was a warm summer evening several years ago. She had been sitting on the porch swing, sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Marmalade and Rusty had been playing in the garden, chasing moths and batting at each other playfully. Suddenly, a loud clap of thunder had startled Rusty, sending him scurrying under the porch swing, trembling. Marmalade, usually the fearless one, had immediately sensed his brother's distress. He'd abandoned his playful antics and had crept under the swing, nudging Rusty gently with his head, licking his ears and purring softly. He'd stayed there, pressed close to Rusty, until the storm had passed, offering silent comfort and reassurance. It was moments like these that reminded Mrs. Davison of the depth of the bond between her two ginger cats. They weren't just pets. They were family, bound together by an invisible thread of love and loyalty. And she, in turn, was their whole world. This quiet, peaceful existence, filled with simple joys and unwavering affection, was all they had ever known, and all they ever needed. It was, in its own way, perfect. The years continued their gentle, unhurried passage, marked by the changing seasons and the small, everyday rituals that made up the fabric of their lives. The golden years, indeed, for Marmalade, Rusty, and Mrs. Davison, but even gold as Mrs. Davison knew from the faded wedding band she still wore, could tarnish with time. The first sign was subtle, almost imperceptible. Rusty, usually a hearty eater, started leaving a few kibbles in his bowl. Mrs. Davison, ever watchful, noticed the change immediately. "Not hungry, my sweet boy?" she'd asked, stroking his soft fur. Rusty had just purred in response, rubbing his head against her hand, but he hadn't touched the remaining food. At first, she dismissed it as a temporary blip. Cats, like people, could have off days. But the pattern continued. Rusty was eating less and less, and he seemed to be sleeping more than usual, even for him. He still sought out his favorite sunny spots, but he lacked his usual languid grace, his movements slower, more deliberate. Marmalade, too, seemed to sense the change. He'd always been the more boisterous of the two, the one who initiated their playful wrestling matches and chases. But now he was more subdued, more watchful. He'd spend more time curled up next to Rusty, grooming him with extra care, his purr a low, rumbling vibration. Mrs. Davison's concern grew with each passing day. She made an appointment with Dr. Evans, the kindly veterinarian who had cared for Marmalade and Rusty since they were kittens. The examination room was filled with the familiar antiseptic scent of a vet's office. Rusty, usually calm and compliant, was unusually fidgety, his amber eyes wide with apprehension. Dr. Evans, a woman with gentle hands and a reassuring voice, examined him thoroughly, checking his heart, his lungs, his eyes, his teeth. "He's lost some weight, Eleanor," Dr. Evans said, her brow furrowed with concern. "And his coat doesn't look quite as healthy as it usually does. I'd like to run some blood tests just to be sure." The wait for the results was agonizing. Mrs. Davison sat in the waiting room, flipping through old magazines without really seeing the words, her heart pounding in her chest. Marmalade, sensing her anxiety, stayed close to her feet, rubbing against her legs and purring softly. When Dr. Evans finally called her back into the examination room, her face was serious. "The blood tests show that Rusty has early-stage kidney disease," she explained gently. "It's quite common in older cats, Eleanor. It's not curable, but it is manageable. We can adjust his diet, give him medication to help support his kidney function, and monitor him closely." Kidney disease. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Mrs. Davison felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She knew that Rusty was getting older, that their time together was finite, but hearing the diagnosis made it all too real. What does this mean for him?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It means we need to make some changes," Dr. Evans replied. "We'll switch him to a special prescription diet that's lower in protein and phosphorus, which will help to reduce the strain on his kidneys. We'll also start him on medication to help control his blood pressure and improve his kidney function. And we'll need to see him regularly for checkups to monitor his progress." Mrs. Davison nodded, trying to absorb all the information. She was determined to do everything she could to keep Rusty comfortable and happy for as long as possible. The following weeks were a period of adjustment. Rusty, initially resistant to the new food, gradually accepted it, though he never ate with his former gusto. Mrs. Davison diligently administered his medication, hiding the pills in small balls of wet food, which he usually swallowed without complaint. Marmalade remained a constant source of comfort to both Rusty and Mrs. Davison. He seemed to understand that his brother was unwell, and he adapted his behavior accordingly. He was more gentle, more patient, more attentive. He'd spend hours curled up next to Rusty, grooming him, purring softly, offering silent support. There were good days and bad days. On the good days, Rusty would seem almost like his old self, sunning himself on the porch, purring contentedly, even engaging in a brief, slow-motion wrestling match with Marmalade. On the bad days, he'd be listless and withdrawn, refusing to eat, hiding under the bed or in the back of the closet. Mrs. Davison watched him closely, her heart aching with every sign of his decline. She knew that she couldn't stop the inevitable, but she could make his remaining time as comfortable and peaceful as possible. She showered him with love and affection, cherishing every moment, every purr, every soft nudge of his head against her hand. The shadow of sickness had fallen upon their quiet home, but the bond between them, between all three of them, remained as strong as ever. It was a bond that even illness couldn't break. It had cast a pall over their once carefree lives, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of loss. Summer arrived in Havenwood, painting the world in vibrant hues. The rose bushes in Mrs. Davison's garden bloomed in a riot of color, their fragrant petals unfurling in the warm sunshine. The air was filled with the buzzing of bees and the chirping of birds, a symphony of life that seemed to mock the quiet decline happening within the walls of the cozy little house. Rusty's condition was stable, but he was undeniably weaker. He spent most of his days sleeping, either curled up in a sunbeam or nestled in Mrs. Davison's lap. He still enjoyed being groomed by Marmalade, his purr a faint, rumbling echo of its former strength. He ate sparingly, picking at his special food, but Mrs. Davison made sure he always had fresh water and a comfortable place to rest. Marmalade, ever vigilant, rarely left Rusty's side. He seemed to have appointed himself as his brother's personal nurse, grooming him, sleeping next to him, and even bringing him gifts. A favorite toy mouse, a brightly colored leaf, a captured, and thankfully, dead, insect. Mrs. Davison watched them with a bittersweet ache in her heart. She knew that this summer might be their last together, and she was determined to make it as peaceful and joyful as possible. She spent hours sitting on the porch with the cats, reading, knitting, or simply enjoying the warm sunshine and the quiet companionship. One particularly memorable day was the 4th of July. Havenwood, like many small American towns, had a tradition of a community picnic and fireworks display in the town park. Mrs. Davison, in years past, had always enjoyed attending, but this year, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving Rusty. Instead, she decided to create her own little celebration at home. She spread a blanket on the back porch, set out a small plate of grilled chicken, a special treat for the cats, in moderation, and poured herself a glass of lemonade. Marmalade and Rusty, nestled on the blanket beside her, seemed to appreciate the change of scenery. As dusk settled, the distant sound of fireworks began to rumble through the air. Rusty, startled by the loud noises, flinched and burrowed closer to Mrs. Davison. Marmalade, usually unfazed by such things, seemed to sense his brother's fear. He licked Rusty's ears and purred softly, a reassuring presence. Mrs. Davison stroked their soft fur, watching the colorful explosions light up the night sky. It wasn't the grand spectacle she was used to, but it was perfect in its own way. She had her two beloved companions by her side, and that was all that mattered. "My sweet boys," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll get through this together." There were other small moments of joy that summer. A visit from Mrs. Davison's niece, Sarah, and her two young children, who adored the cats and showered them with gentle attention. A lazy afternoon spent watching a butterfly flutter around the rose bushes, Rusty's amber eyes following its every move. A shared bowl of vanilla ice cream, a tiny spoonful for each cat, a special treat, their rough tongues lapping at the sweet, cold cream. These moments, fleeting and precious, were like jewels strung together on a fragile thread. Mrs. Davison held onto them tightly, knowing that they were all she had left. She took countless pictures, capturing their every shared glance, every gentle touch, every peaceful nap. She wanted to remember every detail, to hold onto the memory of their love long after they were gone. As the summer days began to shorten, Rusty's decline became more pronounced. He was sleeping almost constantly now, and he had little interest in food or play. He still sought out Mrs. Davison's lap, but his purr was barely audible, a faint vibration against her hand. Marmalade never left his side. He'd curl up next to him, his body pressed close, offering warmth and comfort. He'd groom him meticulously, his rough tongue rasping against Rusty's thinning fur, a silent ritual of love and devotion. Mrs. Davison knew that the end was near. She spoke to Dr. Evans, who confirmed her fears. "There's nothing more we can do, Eleanor," she said gently. "Just keep him comfortable and make sure he knows he's loved." Those words, though expected, hit Mrs. Davison like a physical blow. She had known this day would come, but she wasn't ready. She couldn't imagine her life without Rusty, without his gentle presence, his soft purr, his unwavering affection. But she knew she had to be strong, for his sake and for Marmalade's. She would make his final days as peaceful and loving as possible, surrounded by the warmth of their shared home, the quiet comfort of their unbreakable bond. The summer, once a symbol of vibrant life, was now drawing to a close, mirroring the fading light in Rusty's eyes. The end came quietly, on a cool September morning. Rusty had spent the night nestled in Mrs. Davison's arms, his breathing shallow and labored. Marmalade had been curled up at their feet, his green eyes wide and watchful. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, Rusty took a final, shuddering breath and was still. Mrs. Davison held him close, tears streaming down her face, her heart shattering into a million pieces. Marmalade, sensing the change, let out a low, mournful yowl, a sound that echoed the emptiness that had suddenly filled the room. "Oh, Rusty, my sweet, sweet boy," Mrs. Davison sobbed, stroking his soft, still warm fur. "You were so loved, so very loved." The house felt eerily silent without Rusty's gentle purr, without the soft padding of his paws on the floor. The sunbeams seemed less bright, the colors less vibrant. Everything felt wrong, incomplete. Marmalade was inconsolable. He searched the house for Rusty, his meows echoing through the empty rooms. He'd sniff at Rusty's favorite spots, the sunny patch on the armchair, the soft rug by the fireplace, the windowsill where he used to watch the birds. He'd find nothing but lingering scent, a ghost of his brother's presence. Mrs. Davison, her own grief overwhelming, tried to comfort Marmalade. She held him close, stroking his fur, whispering words of solace, but nothing seemed to ease his distress. He refused to eat, barely touched his water, and spent most of his time huddled in a corner, his body trembling. With the help of her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man who had always been fond of the cats, Mrs. Davison buried Rusty in the garden, beneath his favorite rose bush, a fragrant, crimson bloom that seemed to symbolize the enduring beauty of his life. She placed a small, smooth stone on the grave, a marker of his presence, a tangible reminder of the love they had shared. Marmalade, watching from the window, let out another mournful yowl as the earth covered Rusty's body. He seemed to understand on some primal level that his brother was gone, that he wouldn't be coming back. The days that followed were a blur of grief and emptiness. Mrs. Davison moved through her daily routines like a ghost, her heart heavy with sorrow. She missed Rusty's presence at every turn, his soft fur against her hand, his gentle purr at her feet, his quiet companionship in the evenings. Marmalade's grief was even more profound. He lost all interest in his usual activities. He stopped grooming himself, his once vibrant orange fur becoming dull and matted. He refused to play even with his favorite toy mouse. He barely ate, and he spent most of his time at Rusty's grave, lying on the cool earth, his body pressed against the small stone marker. Mrs. Davison tried everything she could think of to coax him out of his despair. She offered him his favorite treats. She tried to engage him in play. She spent hours simply sitting with him, stroking his fur and talking to him in soothing tones. But nothing seemed to work. He was lost in his grief, consumed by the absence of his brother. She took him to Dr. Evans, who examined him thoroughly. "There's nothing physically wrong with him, Eleanor," Dr. Evans said, her voice filled with compassion. "He's grieving just like you are. Cats feel loss deeply, especially when they've been bonded for so long. Just give him time, and continue to offer him love and support." Time, however, seemed to be working against Marmalade. He continued to decline, growing thinner and weaker with each passing day. He'd spend hours staring out the window, his green eyes clouded with sadness, as if searching for a glimpse of his lost brother. Mrs. Davison's heart ached for him. She understood his pain, his profound sense of loss. She, too, felt the gaping hole that Rusty had left in their lives. But she couldn't reach him, couldn't break through the wall of grief that surrounded him. One evening, as she was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she saw Marmalade slip through the cat flap and make his way to Rusty's grave. He lay down on the cool earth, his body curled around the small stone marker, and let out a soft, sighing meow. Mrs. Davison watched him, tears welling up in her eyes. She knew that Marmalade was not just grieving. He was giving up. He had lost his will to live, his spirit broken by the loss of his lifelong companion. The empty space left by Rusty was too vast, too overwhelming. And in that moment, she realized that she was about to lose him, too. The silence of the house was no longer just the absence of Rusty's purr. It was the premonition of a deeper, more profound silence, a silence that would swallow her whole world. The decline was swift. Marmalade stopped eating altogether, and he barely drank any water. He became increasingly lethargic, spending most of his time sleeping, either at Rusty's grave or in the corner of the living room, curled up in a tight ball. Mrs. Davison tried everything she could to tempt him to eat warm chicken broth, tuna juice, even baby food. But he refused it all, his body rejecting the sustenance that he no longer seemed to want. She took him back to Dr. Evans, who examined him again. "His body is shutting down, Eleanor," she said gently. "He's not in any pain, but he's simply lost the will to live. There's nothing more we can do, medically speaking. Just keep him comfortable, and be there for him." Those words, though expected, were like a knife to Mrs. Davison's heart. She had lost Rusty, and now she was losing Marmalade, too. The two ginger cats who had filled her life with so much joy and companionship were slipping away, leaving her alone in the quiet, empty house. She brought Marmalade home and made him a comfortable bed next to Rusty's grave. Using a soft blanket and his favorite toy mouse, she sat with him, stroking his fur, whispering words of love and comfort, her tears falling onto his matted coat. He was barely responsive, his breathing shallow and weak. His once bright green eyes were dull and clouded, his body thin and frail. But every now and then, he'd open his eyes and look at her, a flicker of recognition in their depths, a faint acknowledgement of her presence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Marmalade's breathing became even shallower. Mrs. Davison held him close, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the faint flutter of his heart. "It's okay, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You can go now. You'll be with Rusty again. You'll be together, forever." With a final, sighing breath, Marmalade was gone. His body relaxed, his eyes closed, and the faint flutter of his heart ceased. Mrs. Davison held him for a long time, sobbing uncontrollably, her grief overwhelming. She buried him next to Rusty, beneath the same crimson rose bush, their graves side by side. She placed another small, smooth stone on his grave, a twin to the one that marked Rusty's resting place. The garden was silent, save for the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. The two ginger cats, who had been inseparable in life, were now reunited in death, their bond unbroken, their love enduring. Mrs. Davison stood there for a long time, gazing at their graves, her heart heavy with sorrow but also filled with a strange sense of peace. She had lost her beloved companions, but she knew that they were no longer suffering. They were together, at rest, in the quiet embrace of the earth. The following days were difficult. The house felt unbearably empty, the silence deafening. Mrs. Davison went through the motions of her daily routines, but her heart wasn't in it. She missed the cats terribly, their presence a constant ache in her soul. She found some comfort in tending to their graves, watering the rose bush, keeping the area clean and tidy. It was a way of honoring their memory, of keeping their presence alive in her heart. One afternoon, as she was sitting by their graves, she noticed a small, orange butterfly fluttering around the rose bush. It landed on one of the blooms, its wings a vibrant splash of color against the deep crimson petals. Mrs. Davison watched it, a faint smile touching her lips. It reminded her of Marmalade, of his adventurous spirit, his playful energy, and she couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, it was a sign, a message from her beloved cats, letting her know that they were at peace, that they were together, and that they were watching over her. The grief would never completely disappear, she knew. The loss of Marmalade and Rusty had left a permanent void in her life. But she also knew that she would carry their love with her always, a warm, comforting presence in her heart. They had been her family, her companions, her furry anchors in a world that could sometimes feel lonely and uncertain. And their memory would live on, a testament to the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. The quiet sunset of her own life was now upon her, but it was a sunset tinged with the golden glow of their memory, a reminder of the joy and companionship they had brought into her world. The two ginger cats were gone, but their love remained, a timeless echo in the quiet stillness of her home and her heart.